Hey everyone, I'm Rick Beato. A few weeks ago, I had a conversation with Tom Scott. Tom is a saxophonist, composer, and arranger whose credits span countless classic albums and film scores. He's worked with some of the biggest names in music, including Steely Dan, Joni Mitchell, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Paul McCartney, Glenn Campbell, Carole King, the Blues Brothers, and Pink Floyd. But before we move on, don't forget to hit subscribe here and on my second channel, Rick Beato 2. Here's my interview. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Tom Scott. Tom, how are you?
I am fine, thank you, Rick.
We've met once before. I was on your podcast.
That is correct, sir.
It was sometime in the 1940s or so. It was a long time ago. But I've known about you forever. And I was joking about this. Now, Tom, he's in his 70s, okay? I'm just going to say it here. Even though you're going to realize that Tom seems like a very young guy. When I met you on the live stream, I was like, Tom seems like he's about 50 years old or so.
Bless you.
What's the secret to that?
I think laughter, mom and dad, and all the people, all my genetic relatives, all the way back to the beginning of time, and music, you know, friends and family, those things.
So I started seeing your names on records in the early 70s, but you started making records. You're a saxophonist, arranger, writer, composer, all these different things.
Right.
I started seeing your names, Tom Scott and the LA Express. Well, when would that have been, like 72 or something?
73.
73?
Was the beginning of the LA Express, yeah.
And then I saw you on Joni Mitchell records. I saw you on Steely Dan records. I saw you on every kind of record imaginable. You are on so many albums, not only as a horn player, but as an arranger. And when was the first time you stepped in a studio?
Wow.
Your dad was a musician, right?
My dad was a great film and television composer. By the time he passed, he'd amassed over 700 credits in arranging and composing for films and television. A lot of television he did. He started to work for Republic Pictures in the 50s, which he used to call Repulsive Pictures, actually. But it was a great training ground for him because he got to write music for a lot of, westerns, and they did a lot of like Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, and all that kind of stuff. And on that staff were people who went on to greatness, as well as my father, like Henry Mancini and others. And then he became an independent film and television composer, joined with the CBS staff for a while, and during that period, he wrote episodes of Twilight Zone, Wagon Train, Laramie, and a bunch of other CBS shows. So there was always some dramatic music somewhere in the room in my house.
Would he write at home?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
And so you'd hear that stuff all the time.
Yeah, and he had a wonderful harmonic sense, beautiful. I'll tell you a quick story about my father. When he passed in 2008, and I was on a big session, or orchestra session, in which for a television special, in which John Williams was to come in and conduct a medley of famous instrumental movie themes.
Okay.
Now, I knew John a little bit because I used to see him at Fox when I was over there writing music a bit. And I knew my dad knew him, but my dad never said anything about him, except that he knew him. My dad had zero flair for self-promotion, I must say. He might have been more famous had he had a little more of that. But anyway, John walks in. I'm at the end of a woodwind row. He sees me, and he walks right over to me, right here, and kneels down and says, "Tom, I'm very sorry about your father's passing." I said, "Thank you, John. That's so sweet." Then he said, he's so humble, honest to God, he says to me, "I don't know if your father remembered me or not." And I said, "Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here, John." And I'm pretty sure he remembered you. Well, he says the reason I say that is because when I was a studio piano player in the 50s, that's what I did, and considering whether I wanted to jump into the area of television and film composing, my first assignment was supervised by your father. I said, "Really? I didn't know that." And he said, and a major reason why I decided to pursue it was because your father was so kind and encouraging to me.
Wow.
And I'm like, first of all, what nicer thing could be said about one's father?
Absolutely.
But more than that, what if Dad had been a jerk, an asshole? Who would have done Jaws and Star Wars and Superman and Indiana Jones and all those great scores? He would have said, screw this.
Okay, so your dad, when you were coming up, when did you start playing instruments? Did your parents make you play instruments?
Oh, God, no. No.
Okay.
No. Actually, my first love was folk music.
Okay.
The Weavers, Burl Ives,
Okay.
Josh White, Leadbelly, all these people. I had records of all these people, and I took up the ukulele, and I could accompany myself, and, Once I got into the fourth grade, I think, we had a brand new music teacher, a very elderly lady, Mrs. Todd, and she came around to all the classes and said, we're forming a school orchestra here. That was Riverside Drive Elementary School in the San Fernando Valley. And there were instruments to be rented, and I memorized the list of all the instruments, and what do I want to do? I went home and talked about it with my dad. I may have said something about saxophone, which was not, of course, offered in the elementary school orchestra.
Right.
And he said, son, if you want to play the saxophone, play the clarinet, because, and of course, my dad, having worked with all the great studio woodwind players for decades, he said, you'll benefit greatly on the saxophone if you master the clarinet first. Okay, Dad. So I rented a metal clarinet from the school for, I think it was $5 for this entire semester.
Wow.
This is 57, something like that.
Okay.
So I was 9. And my dad, wanting me to have the best possible influence possible, bought me a famous record recorded 10 years before I was born, Benny Goodman at Carnegie Hall, with his big band, the King of Swing, with Harry James and Teddy Wilson and Lionel Hampton and Gene Krupa. Yeah. I wore that record out, man. And then I realized in hindsight that when I perceive music, I'm deconstructing it in my head. That's just the way I roll. I don't know why. It's my DNA. And I just wanted to get inside the music and understand it. And so the first thing, Benny Goodman had a signature phrase that he would do. I think this is the first thing I ever figured out, because the band goes, so, okay, what is that? So I had my phonograph over here, and he'd do the lick, and then I'd take it off and get up the clarinet and go da 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 da, one note at a time, and then write it out. And eventually, that extended to arrangements. I had a Count Basie record that of all Quincy Jones arrangements called One More Time, and that's the next one I got into. Actually trying to figure out what all the voicings were with the saxophone.
No, wait, your dad wasn't helping you with this?
He not in the sense that he was teaching me, but if I was stumped by anything, I could go, Dad, what is this? And he would tell me, thanks. Call it obsession or addiction. I don't know what it is, but I just wanted to know this real bad. And so in junior high school, or they call it middle school now, I had to play the saxophone, and plus there was they called it a dance band then, but it's a stage band. That's what they call it now. A big band. There was one opening in the baritone sax chair. And I lugged that sucker around
very sax.
to the bus, to the school bus and everything. They had one to rent, and so again, my father wanted to have me influenced by the best there is. He bought me a record, Getz meets Mulligan in hi-fi.
There you go. There you go.
And that was the beginning of my affection for what I guess you'd call straight ahead jazz.
Okay, talk a little bit about the difference between the clarinet and the saxophone, and why, first of all, in concert music, why you don't have saxophones, why that's not offered at first for band kids. Right. And talk about that for a second.
Well, I'd be surmising to say why they don't, why they didn't, but I can take a good guess. First of all, the orchestral literature very little of it, sorry.
As saxophone.
Had saxophone. Prokofiev wrote for it. But, the saxophone, in terms of the invention of orchestral musical instruments, came late.
That's right.
Like 1870s, 80s, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So it was considered like a bastard instrument.
Yeah.
It's made out of a brass, but it's a woodwind, what the hell, And it's kind of annoying sound, it's louder than than other woodwind instruments. So it just wasn't part of the orchestral literature. But the great thing about the clarinet is that, first of all, unlike a saxophone, which has keys that you press down, so all you have to do is make sure it's shut and you're good. Clarinet has tone holes, and you have to learn how to cover them with the ball of your finger.
Yes.
So that is, to try and do saxophone to start with, and then try to figure that out on the clarinet would be a struggle, I'm sure. Much easier to go the other way, which is what I did, and what I tell other kids to do. Also, clarinet, because it's got such a thin, relatively small bore, you've got to really learn how to concentrate the airstream in a way that is, again, to get a good sound on the clarinet, you've got to play it correctly. And by that I mean how to use your diaphragm, the things that singers learn, and anybody who plays a wind instrument well does. That's what we have to do to make a good sound. And so it's just a great setup tool for saxophone. And I still play clarinet today. I don't play it often because it doesn't come up that often, but I still enjoy it.
Well, I will say that I went to school as a music ed major, and I had to take class clarinet. And clarinet was the most difficult instrument. I mean, I was a classical bass major in my undergrad, so I had to play all the different strings. But I had to take woodwinds too, and the clarinet was by far the most difficult instrument to play, to just get a sound out of.
Right.
I mean, nothing was even close. It really hard instrument to play.
It's hard at first. Hard at first, but it's like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. I mean, there's no substitute for just getting it. And then later I took up the flute. I don't know, how old was I then? I don't know, 12 or 13. And the thing about the clarinet and saxophone, which is completely unlike the flute, is that on the clarinet and sax, it's these muscles here that have to be, you've got to learn to tighten them to, play properly. On the flute, you've got to completely undo those habits, because it's all about right in here.
Yes.
Aiming that airstream right properly into that little hole. And of course, obviously with clarinet sax, it's the reed that's doing the vibrating. On a flute, it's the air itself that's doing the vibrating. So it's, I remember just putting the flute down and just crying my heart out at the beginning. I just couldn't get it.
So how did you end up starting to make records and getting into studios and doing arranging and all that?
Okay, well, a couple of things happened. I guess the pivotal thing was that I came on Oliver Nelson's band. Oliver Nelson, for those of you who don't know, is an extremely important and underrated jazz saxophonist, arranger, composer, wonderful, and also my mentor and a great guy. I miss him to this day. I got a call, a really strange call. I was on the sub list for a gig that was happening at a club up here called Marty's on the Hill. It's not there anymore, but it was kind of near in Baldwood Hills, which is kind of the Bel Air of the black community kind of thing. Mm-hmm. The tenor saxophonist that was doing the gig, Bill Green, I believe it was, I think he got ill. Something happened on the first couple of days of the gig, so I got called in as a sub to play in this big band, which included Ed Thigpen on drums, of course, from the Oscar Peterson Trio.
Yeah.
And Bobby Bryant played lead trumpet, and oh God, who the hell else was on that band? Anyway, well, Frank Strazzeri played piano. It's been too long.
What year would this have been?
This was 1967. I was 19.
Okay.
So I came on the gig and ended up getting the gig. And the standout performance that I did was a sort of a combination of a solo duet and then individual solo on the tune Milestones. Mm-hmm. And so I played my heart out on that record. And at the end of the gig, Bob Thiel came along, who was the producer of Impulse Records.
Yep.
And
Famous
of course,
producer.
Impulse was like, Oliver was on Impulse.
Yep.
So they came to do a live taping, recording of this record. And Impulse, of course, had Coltrane and Charlie Mingus and Eric Dolphy. And I mean, it was like one of the Tiffany of jazz labels at the time. And great covers, great cover art and all that. Double covers always, Bob Thiel, I'm putting my horn away, and we did the live recording, I think maybe a couple of nights, I forget. Anyway, Bob Thiel comes over and says, hey, I'm putting my horn away, and he's down there on the floor, and I'm up on the stage. He says, hey, kid, you want to make a record for Impulse? And I'm like, you talking to me? Why, yes, Mr. Thiel, I'd love to. So that led to my first solo record, which I was 20. And I didn't have a lot to do with the planning of it, because that was done by Bob, and he thought he could, I think, make me kind of a saxophone pop star. I believe that was his theory.
Okay.
So I walk in the studio the first day, and there are some guys from the Wrecking Crew, because they were kind of in their twilight, but still, Glenn Campbell was one of the guitar players on my session.
Okay.
Carol Kay played bass.
Okay.
Emil Richards on percussion. I think Jim Gordon, rest his soul, played drums. Mike Melvin on keyboards. Anyway, it was like the hot session guys.
And you knew who all these people were, right?
I did, but I'd never met a lot of them before,
Yeah.
So, it was just like, great, man, how cool is this? And about 6 or 7 of Hollywood's finest at the time studio singers.
Okay.
And the arrangements were done by the great pop arrangers of that time, Al Capps and Ian Freeburn Smith and John Baylor. And anyway, these guys were at the top of their game in the Hollywood pop music scene at the time.
Wait, did you have any idea what you were going to do, though?
I think I did. In fact, I did contribute one tune to the thing. A thing in 7/4 time that I'd written while I was with Don Ellis big band.
So you get in there.
So I get in there, and we're doing basically cover records of the hit tunes of the day. We did They Call It Mellow Yellow, that one, and we did Today, da 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 da, that one. The Association, I think, was the. And you remember this, right?
I'm almost 63. Yeah.
Okay, you're an old guy too. Anyway, Baby, 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 I Love You. That was Aretha's follow-up to Respect, I think. Which Respect, by the way, I wore that thing out. What a classic R&B thing. That was the greatest. Anyway, so I did the session, and apparently word started getting out about me. And and then Bob Thiel had me write a big band record for a put together studio band, which he called the Bob Thiel Emergency. He just loved to put out records on his own, as it was them as the artist. And so I wrote 3 or 4.
Of course, he had nothing to do with it other than being the producer, right?
Yeah. He was the producer, and
Yeah.
And I remember I wrote a Beatles medley, and I wrote a couple of original tunes, and a bunch of stuff. Anyway, I remember Howard Roberts was on that date. Now, I'd maybe met him before, but I just don't remember now. It's been too long. But I had all the great players, and Bob Brookmeyer was in town, who I adored,
great
from
arranger.
New York. And valve trombonist. You know it's him from 3 notes. You know who it is. So that sort of also cemented my kind of reputation as this young kid who was doing well. Then I remember, I don't know exactly the time, but the first session that I recall was for a group called Harper's Bazaar. Harper's Bazaar had done a cover. It was a bunch of very blonde white guys, about 3 or 4 or 5 of them. They had done a cover version of Slow Down, You Move Too Fast, that one. You got to make the morning last just... Which had been a relative hit. I don't remember how far it got up the charts, but anyway, this was a follow-up to that tune, and I was paired with a guy named Jim Horn, who was a great saxophone player. We ended up doing a lot of sessions as a kind of a duo in that time period. Leon Russell played piano on the date, Anyway, I don't remember what the tune was, and I think it tanked, and I think that was pretty much the end of their career as hit makers. But I just kind of worked my way to the session scene, and of course, at the same time, so I started playing at Dante's club with the Howard Roberts Quintet, which was Howard Roberts, Dave Grusin on piano,
Yep.
who had come, he had been on the road with Andy Williams, and then Andy Williams got his own variety show, so Dave was the music director of that show, MD.
Yeah.
And he said, this just is a bit of an aside, but I did a podcast with Dave, and I didn't realize this, that he had 3 other arrangers because it was a solid music show, the Andy Williams variety show. And so Billy May, Johnny Mandel, and Dick Hazard, who was not as well known as those other guys, but the 4 of them wrote the arrangements for Andy Williams. I mean, couldn't get any better than that.
Yeah.
But anyway, Dave is like playing piano, so it was like, God, an honor to meet him. And Chuck DeMonico and John Guerin, who were, by that time, kind of the hot session guys at that time. I actually knew Chuck because we were both on the Don Ellis band together when I was 16, 17. So that led to me forming my own quartet, because when Bob Thiel wanted me to do a second record, I said, I want to have it done one. I mean, I appreciate, the meeting all those great Hollywood people, but I did a quartet record called Rural Still Life with John and Chuck and Mike Lang on piano, who was a young guy. The funny story about that, which I love to tell, the title tune written by Mike Lang was called Rural Still Life. And so came time to shoot the cover photo, and the photographer calls. He says, listen, let's do a cover with your band. And there's a place in the North Valley I know that's got like horses and cabins and stuff. And we'll find a place and, pose you guys and take a picture, which is exactly what we did. We posed in front of this like funky old cabin that was part of this ranch. And 6 months later, it was the home of the Charles Manson family. It was the Spawn movie ranch.
Oh my God! You didn't meet Charles or anything?
I don't think they were there. I hope they weren't there at the time. No. There seemed to be no one there. Actually, it was pretty just desolate.
When I saw the LA Express records, I saw Larry Carlton. This is where I first, started seeing people like that.
Right.
Kind of the next wave of the session guys.
Correct.
Of the 70s session players, Joe Sample.
Right.
Where did these meetings happen?
Right. Well, so I was asked to be the regular Tuesday night band at the Baked Potato, which is a great club, still there, still looks about the same.
Yep.
I was the Tuesday night band, and it was actually 2 great players who left the band. Mike Wofford, a wonderful pianist, now in San Diego, but he was Sarah Vaughan's accompanist and Ella Fitzgerald accompanist from time to time, just a musical wizard. Chuck DeMonico, again, was on bass. And it was a straight-ahead gig. We played straight-ahead jazz and loved it. We didn't care how many people were in the club, 10 or 20. We didn't care. It was just our Tuesday night to kind of do our thing, as opposed to doing recording sessions, which, of course, is different. Due to factors I don't remember, we lost Mike Wofford and Chuck DeMonico. John Guerin, our drummer, suggested we get Max Bennett to play bass. Max was one of those guys who had made a successful transition from the upright bass to the electric bass. And for those of you, this is the story with a lot of upright bass players. Of course, upright bass was the bass in the recording business up until, the middle 60s when things started changing. And if you were an upright bass player in the studios and you couldn't make the successful transition to electric bass, you were through.
That's right.
It was tough. Mm-hmm. Max is one of those guys, he played with like Kenton and Peggy Lee and all these other people, upright, totally made the successful transition. So much that he was like probably, along with Carol Kay perhaps, the most in-demand electric bass player at the time. So, okay, I didn't know Max, but anyway, he came in. And then we lost Mike Wofford, as I say, our pianist, and it was without notice one Tuesday. We were suddenly like stuck without a piano player. Well, lo and behold, Joe Sample had been coming to the bar, sitting there, hearing us for the last few weeks before. And I said, Joe, can you help us out? So he sat down and we played, again, some straight ahead jazz, but Max had a tune that he brought in. And it was, this all sounds so naive at the time, but because the term jazz fusion or jazz funk really, hadn't been,
Had been invented.
It had been invented, basically, yeah. So Max brought this tune, and we were playing like I was playing, kind of my bebop library of licks, but the rhythm section, of course, instead of just do straight ahead, it would be like do 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 do, just bass lines from in the kind of the James Brown category stuff, R&B, and it was so fun and different, and more importantly, the audience loved it.
Right.
And the audience started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember one night, this was still the quartet. I remember driving, getting off the freeway at Lancashire Boulevard, driving up to Cahuenga and making the turn, because the Baked Potato was basically just off the corner.
Yeah.
And I see a line of people down the sidewalk, and I go, holy crap, maybe we've got a tiger by the tail here. And so that I knew something was up, and so I both Max and I started increasing the library, for this kind of music, this style of music. So then, I guess it was John and Max who were kind of the duo. They drove matching Jensen cars and both dressed real hip. They were like the John and Max for a while. They suggested we had a guitar. Now, this is how naive I was at the time. I said, well, we're playing, like improvising and stuff, and two chordal instruments. How are they going to play together without conflicting? They'll work it. Trust us, Tom. They'll work it out. It's an idiot. Anyway, so we brought in this young new kid, Larry Carlton, who, by the way, was from Torrance. So we called him Lawrence of Torrance.
Did you know him before that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't know. It was close. I might have met him on a session, but, and of course that was the beginning of what became the LA Express. And then Louis Shelton, who was another wonderful guitarist, who was in the studios for a while, sweetheart. And he eventually moved to Nashville and still there, I believe. But one night he's at a table there, and we were thinking of a name. And Louis, in that slow voice of his, why don't you call it the LA Express? I kind of like that. By the way, working with Louis Shelton in the studio was unbelievable because, first of all, in those days, if the producer, and he was a producer too.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. If you pressed on that talkback button from the booth, you'd hear shh. So if Louis was in the booth, here's how it would go. We do a session, do a take of a tune. And, well, what'd you think, Louis? Shh. Well, maybe we should do one more. Fantastic. He was like a character. Anyway, he's the guy that named the LA Express.
Talk about record deals at the time, and what were record deals like? Did you ever make any money from?
Okay, great question.
Yeah.
I have a thing that I talk about with that, and I'll use some round numbers,
Okay.
and they may be slightly off one way or
We're
another.
talking about the 70s
You'll
here,
get
so,
the
yeah.
idea, right?
Yeah.
Well, 60s actually,
60s,
when I
okay.
first signed my first
Okay.
record deal. So the arrangement was, and through the 70s and beyond, was that a label would approach you and say, okay, we want to sign you as an artist. Mm-hmm. And first of all, we want to sign you for X number of years. You know, it could be maybe a record, or maybe 3 records, or maybe 5 years, one album per year, whatever their deal is. And for your first record, we will give you a budget. And let's say it's $100,000, which for a jazz album is kind of a lot, but on the other hand, for the kind of records I was making with pop things and all stars, you know, and everything, and of course you got to pay for the studio and the mixer and all that. So it's not hard to spend $100,000. So you do the album for $100,000, and hopefully you can save enough out of the budget to put some money in your pocket, because you gotta live at the same time. And so you hand them a finished master, and they're the ones that pay for the promotion, the marketing, the album covers, and all that. But the deal is, Now, again, for round numbers, let's say you have a 10% royalty, which is not uncommon. I mean,
No.
that probably was somewhere on my deal at the time.
Yeah.
So for every record sold, and let's just say records sell retail for $10 at that time. So for every record sold, you make a dollar, right? However, you've got to earn back that $100,000 before you receive a penny. So let's say, just for argument's sake, that the company sells 100,000 records. That's a gross of $1 million, out of which the record company, well, of course they have expenses, but their take is $900,000, and your take is zero, because you've just gotten to the point where you've paid back and that's the situation I was in for. I mean, I did like 33 albums. It was always kind of like that. By the time I paid it off, if I did, it was time to make another record. So I get another budget, and we start this all over again.
Okay, Tom, I have to ask this. So, did you have lawyers negotiate the deals?
I did.
Okay.
But a lawyer a long time ago gave me great advice. He says, Tom, listen, we'd love to get you a better deal, but in point of fact, at this point in your career, you don't bring enough to the table as a negotiator to effectively negotiate a better deal. We're kind of stuck with whatever they're willing to offer us. And that was just the reality of it. That's business.
But you had enough to keep making records.
Well,
and the
yes,
records were
and of
successful
course,
enough that
yes. And at the same time, again, I was doing sessions. I started to write music for television.
Yep.
Which I had a parallel career going there. So financially, I was doing fine, but not because of the record royalties.
Okay, so you wrote arrangements and played on many famous records. And I first saw you on Joni Mitchell records. You are on, probably 5 of her records or so, starting with
4, I think. For the Roses was the first.
For the Roses, Court and Spark.
Miles of Isles.
Miles of Isles.
A little bit on
Hissing
Hissing of Summer Lawns, I think.
Yeah.
I can't remember now. But it was just one session, one tune or something like that.
Yeah.
I was on the outs with her by then.
Okay. Now, did you bring Larry Carlton in on these things with you?
With Joni?
Yes.
Well, what happened was, and now we're back to the baked potato, and,
Yeah.
and now the LA Express is chugging along in full bloom, and we are actually recording what was our first album on downtime at A&M with Hank Sicalo, who was Lou Adler's engineer who done Carole King and Cheech and Chong and all this stuff. And he came and heard the band and said, "Hey guys, let's record."
Wait, what's downtime mean? You mean off time?
Oh,
off hours?
when the studio's not otherwise being used or booked
Okay.
by someone else. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so Joni walks into the club one night, and of course I had done, as you say, the album For the Roses with her, which was a marvelous experience.
Yes.
I mean, musically, professionally, I could not have been any more impressed with her. Not because of her musical technical knowledge, because she didn't have any, which I found astounding, because she would play these great, like, to my way of thinking, jazz chords.
Yeah.
And I would go, man, that's like D flat, E flat minor. She says, I don't know what it is. I just like the sound of it. That was a great lesson to me, because you can be a musical genius without having any technical knowledge whatsoever. She is one.
Yes.
She is one. So she walks into the club one night. I was just pleased to see her. Hey, Joni, thanks for coming in. It's great. She says, Tom, I want to talk to you. She says, I'm doing my next album, and I want to actually do it live with a band. Now, I never realized or thought about it, but up until that time, and she'd done Ladies of the Canyon and Blue and For the Roses and others, she'd never recorded with a band. What she did, and thank God her time was so good, her rhythmic sense was so good, she would walk into the studio and either playing piano or guitar and voice, record a track. Then she would hire a bass player, bring him in, send him home. Bring in a drummer, have him overdub, send him home. She never recorded with a band at once. Never had that experience. So when she said, "Would you consider having your band, the LA Express, play on my next album?" I think we could work that out, Joni. Yeah. So that led to what became the album Court and Spark. for which I won my first Grammy as the arranger on a tune called Down to You, which Joni, dare I say this, which Joni erroneously credits herself as a co-arranger with me, and she didn't arrange a note. I did it all. And I've wrestled with that, the kind of the unfairness of that, because it really, but that's just the way she is. She's very reluctant to give credit away.
I had dinner with her one time back in 2021, and I asked her, what was the record that you recorded where the production and songwriting you felt were the best, that you really achieved the vision both musically with the arrangements and with the songwriting? Court and Spark.
She said that?
Yes.
Well, great. And then she said, I cannot thank Tom Scott enough for that.
Well, she did say that, actually.
She did?
No.
Because look,
she might have said that.
Yeah, whatever. It's so long ago. Who cares? But of course, I did do master rhythm parts for the guys, based on a tape, real tape. You know, I wish I had that.
Mean?
Okay, so you know, back in those days, we worked on tape, and she would sing demos of all these songs on a reel of tape, and hand it to me, and I would go home with this reel of tape and transcribe quarterly, harmonically, what was in the form of the tune and all that kind of stuff. Make the charts and bring them to my boys, Joe and Larry and Max and John, and we were in the studio with her at A&M Studio B, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing, and the tunes were just outstanding. You know, it's funny, when I first got asked to do a Joni Mitchell record, which was, I say, For the Roses. The reason I got called was because, well, if I go back far enough, really, the reason that I was there with Joni was because of Quincy Jones, oddly enough. Quincy Jones, in 1970, had formed a record company as a partnership with Harold Robbins, an author who was in the same building down the street on Sunset, which the Playboy Club was at the bottom, 9000 Sunset, that's what it was.
Okay.
They had a floor up there in that office building. Harold Robbins, I guess, wanted to be in the record business, in addition to his success as an author of the Carpetbaggers kind of, romance, sexy novels, very successful. And Ray Brown had become a partner with Quincy, so the three of them formed a record company, and I was to be their first artist on the West Coast, and Valerie Simpson was to be their first East Coast artist. And we actually did some sessions for this album that never was to be.
Okay.
But in discussing the material with Quincy, he says to me, do you know the tune Woodstock? I said, you mean the thing on the main title, the Crosby, Stills and Nash thing, the main title of the movie? He says, well, yeah, that's the tune. Have you ever heard the original? I said, no. Well, it's written by this Joni Mitchell. Oh, and I in those days I had equal, knowledge of Judy Collins, Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez. They were kind of one thing.
Right.
Not true.
That's not true. Right.
So anyway, I said, I'll get that album and listen to it, which I did. I listened, I think that was Ladies of the Canyon, I believe. And I listened to that tune, Woodstock, and I was just floored by it. And it had an amazing ethereal kind of, I don't know how to describe it.
We are stardust, we are golden, and we got to get ourselves back to the
In any case, I decided to do a version of that at Quincy's suggestion on this album. And I played the soprano recorder as the lead instrument and got my guys to do all kinds of kind of atmospheric stuff around it. And the record company went by. It just went away. But I'd done that tune, and I realized how good it was. I really liked it a lot. So Herb Alpert signed me in '71, right or very shortly thereafter. And so I did an album called Great Scott, little on the nose. It not my idea for a title, but anyway, I re-recorded Woodstock. And so now it's 1973, 2 or 3, whenever we did For the Roses, I get a call from Joni's engineer, Henry Louis, and he says, Tom, Joni heard this track you made on Woodstock and wants to know if you'd like to play on her album. I said, sure. Again, not really realizing the full extent of her music and how amazing she was, you know. So I walked into that studio, and the first track she played me, I don't remember whether I played it on or not, but it was a tune called Ludwig's Song. And the gist of the lyric was, what must it have been like for a genius like Beethoven to go deaf and still write music, and how would that, you know, I thought, well, this is not actually Boy Meets Girl, is it? This is a little different subject. Right. So I was just really, really amazed with her, the breadth of her talent, you know, lyrics, obviously all the instruments she played, a beautiful voice, just an unbelievable artist. So that's how, what sort of, and then, you know, then back to Court and Spark.
Let me read some of the other records that you've been involved with, because it's really kind of, it gets to the point where it's almost impossible to interview somebody that's played, I mean, obviously, I was going to say somebody as old as you, Tom, but...
it's all right. Say it.
I'm just joking. So, Blues Brothers.
Yes.
Talk about the Blues Brothers.
Okay. So...
we're just going to go down the list.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
We've got to think a second to get things in order here, how it all happened.
1978, briefcase full of blues.
Yeah, right. So I had seen the Blues Brothers, being an avid Saturday Night Live watcher.
Yep.
Which was really a bit that one bit that they did on an episode of Saturday Night Live. The boys, John and Danny, dressed up. John told me later, we were just emulating a Roy Orbison, the way he dressed. Mm-hmm. They didn't, you know, the characters hadn't really been fleshed out or anything, which became so iconic later.
Right.
So I knew about them. And then I read in the paper that Steve Martin, who at the time was the hottest stand-up comic in 1978, he was coming to Universal Amphitheater, which was then an open-air amphitheater, and the Blues Brothers were going to be his opening act. And I thought, oh man, I got to get back there. Now, I already knew a couple of the horn players, Lou Marini and Tom Malone. I'd known them from the past, and I thought, boy, maybe I can just get back there and just hang with them and, you know, meet 3 of the hottest comics around. That would be fun. Well, I didn't have to, because, I don't know, a couple of weeks before that engagement, I got a call from Tom Malone, and he says to me, Tom, my wife is scheduled to have a C-section, a delivery of our baby, right in the middle of our week at Universal Amphitheater. Would you sub for me the first couple of days? Yeah, I'll do it. I took about a millisecond to figure that one out. So I go to on the Monday of the first day of this week engagement, which, by the way, was to be recorded at the end, which was, of course, Briefcase Full of Blues. That album. I meet John and Danny. They were great. We hadn't talked about money or anything, or how to, you know. So I brought my tour manager, Jim Root, who had been Cheech and Chong's road manager, just a great guy. And so maybe if I didn't want to talk about it, so maybe he could figure out how to broach the subject, you know, at some time when there was a break in the proceedings. And so we played the rehearsal. It went great. I knew it was going to be a lot of fun. And so there was a moment with Belushi and me and Jim, my road manager, and Jim says, you know, Tom gets triple scale for his work. Now, what that means, of course, was that he was saying that Tom gets triple union scale for all the gigs that he does. Now, that wasn't always true, but of course, negotiate from strength.
Right.
He was putting it out there. Well, John went, oh, really? Oh, does he? So from that point on, I was Tom triple scale Scott.
Oh, yeah.
He was such an asshole. It's so funny, though. I loved him. Loved John. Anyway, so I do the gig. I think I did 3 nights. And sure enough, Tom Malone's wife had the baby, so he's flying in from New York. And so I go the next day, think I'm just going to hand it off and say, man, this is great fun. The band, by the way, was killer. Steve Jordan on drums and Duck Dunn on bass, all those guys.
Oh, yeah.
And Paul Schaefer was still in the band then. And the horn section, and the John and Danny were fabulous. And as I say, their only gigs up to that point was that one skit they'd done on Saturday Night Live. So the audience really didn't know what they were in for. And we did a powerhouse 35-minute set. And Jim Root my road manager had a term for the reaction of the crowd. He says, "Oh, it's a trout crowd." What do you mean a trout crowd? Well, they just end up looking like this. Like, hook 'em. So that was a trout crowd, and they were just stunned by the kick-ass set that we did. So instead of handing off to Tom Malone, Belushi comes up to me and says, "Hey Tom, listen, let's just make it 4 horns instead of 3. From now on, you're a blues brother." And with that signal pronouncement, I became a blues brother.
Unbelievable.
I know. Now, what I found out later, years later from Paul Schaefer, is that John didn't have the power to do that.
Okay.
He had to go to Bernie Brillstein, the manager, and say, is it okay if we add another horn? And I guess Bernie said, okay.
Okay, so I'm going to read off some other people that of records that you supposedly are part of here. Not Joan Baez, Glenn Campbell, The Carpenters, Natalie Cole, Christopher Cross, Neil Diamond, Donovan, Dan Fogelberg, George Harrison. There's Dark Horse. There's 4 records here.
Right.
Tell me about working with George.
So
Dark
again,
Horse, 1974.
Yeah, well, I have to back up way before that.
Okay.
To my last year in high school. Mm-hmm. During the summer, I took a course from a kind of avant-garde jazz trumpet player named Don Ellis. He'd come out from the East Coast and joined the UCLA music department. Mm-hmm. And I took 2 classes back to back. I think it was 2 nights a week during the summer, jazz improvisation and jazz composing and arranging.
Okay.
And I got there, and Don had formed a group called the Hindustani Jazz Sextet with some jazz musicians and added a gentleman named Hari Har Rao. Hari Har Rao was a member of the ethnomusicology department at UCLA. He had, from India, of course, he had studied himself with Ravi Shankar, played tabla, sitar, and was just an amazing guy. So Don was experimenting with adding that element into the jazz thing, which I found fascinating. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to Indian music, the raga thing and the actual music itself, our Western ears aren't really well attuned to that, because they do a concert for East Indian music is like one key the whole night. We're used to modulation and stuff, but they're all about melody and the rhythm part. Well, the rhythm part fascinated me. And so I ended up meeting Hari Har and wanting to learn more about that rhythm, because that's what I thought I could incorporate into my jazz playing and it was fantastic what it did for my playing, actually. So I took tabla lessons with Hari Har Rao once a week for about a year, something like that. Mm-hmm. So now how old was I now at this point? 66, I guess. I knew this movie producer named Ben Shapiro, who used to come into Dante's and hear us play. He called me one day and said, "Tom, listen, Ravi Shankar is coming to Los Angeles to write the score for a film called Charlie with Cliff Robertson, based on a famous short story called Flowers for Algernon, which, of course, Cliff Robertson played the main character, the premise of which was these scientists come up with a drug that's supposed to make people improve the intelligence, the IQ of people. So they find this guy, Cliff Robertson, who's a very low IQ guy, and they give him this medicine, drugs, and he becomes very smart.
Okay.
Falls in love with the lady scientist, right, the researcher, and then it's like a tragedy in the end, because then they discover that the effects of this drug are only temporary, and then he reverts back to, So Cliff Robertson won an Academy Award for Best Actor that year. So he says, okay, we're doing the score to this thing. Ravi Shankar's coming out, and Ravi asked his friend Hari Harada to make a list of all the people in LA who were kind of oriented somewhat to Indian music, and you're on the list. Fantastic. So I remember it at Western, down the street, down east of here, or United recording it was. We had a meet and greet with Ravi Shankar.
Okay.
Now, of course, Ravi Shankar was famous.
Oh, yeah.
Because he, of course, George Harrison had wanted to study the sitar, and also, I found out later, just get some peace from being a Beatle. Being a Beatle was not fun for him, It was just all this frantic fandom, So that was part of him going to India, but Ravi had then come back and done the Monterey Pop Festival and all the publicity from the Beatles. He was kind of now a pop star.
Yeah.
I met Ravi in a line of people, and what I said to him was, I studied Hantapla with the Hari Rao, and he says, oh, that makes you my grandson, and he reaches out and gives me a big hug, and I'm thinking, I'm the hippest guy in the world right now. So we do the movie score, and it was great fun. It was about a week or maybe 2, I don't know how many weeks, but it was, because Ravi didn't do it in a conventional way. He had some melodies written out, but he would take each scene and he'd walk around with a stopwatch around his neck, and he'd time, and then say, you guys play this, or a couple of woodwinds, me and Bud Shank, I think, and some percussion, obviously, a few strings. It was a chamber group, really. And it was really different than any traditional movie score you've ever heard. It was very great. It was great. Now, back to George. George, once the Beatles broke up, he still had an obligation with EMI to do 3 solo albums. He was very, very not a fan of EMI by that time. And Bhaskar Menon, I believe, was the president at that time. He used to speak disparagingly of him.
Okay.
He wanted to do something that would kind of screw you to Capitol. And the one thing that he could do without any contractual obligations on their part was form his own record company and produce for the record company. So he did that very thing, took an office of all places at downstairs from Ode Records, where I was to become a solo artist later on.
Wow,
I was a solo artist by then. So that A&M lot, by the way, that's another story. That was just talk about a pop music paradise, man. It was awesome. Anyway, the first album that George decides to produce is called Ravi Shankar, Family and Friends. And I was one of the friends.
Wow.
So I walk into A&M LA, Studio A, and there are a bunch of the same people who were on Ravi's movie score, and also a bunch of East Indian musicians joined in there too. So I got to meet some of those great musicians, unbelievable, just technique up the yin-yang. And I'm sitting there at my chair in the place, and I look in the booth, and there's George Harrison. I'm like, oh my God, it's George, it's a Beatle, it's George Harrison. He obviously had done some research and knew who I was, because when the first break came out, I didn't get up and get coffee or anything. I was just sitting in my chair. He walks out of the booth, comes straight over to me, and says, "You're the one that studied with Hari Rao, right?" I said, "Well, yeah, I am." He says, "Do you enjoy listening to Indian music?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Come with me." And at that moment, I became George's pal for the better part of 3 years.
Wow.
Off and on. I came to Friar Park on several occasions when we were working on those 3 albums in which I was involved. And in Los Angeles, he was a dear friend, and I spent a lot of time with him.
Wow.
And it was just great. He was, the funny things about him that you wouldn't necessarily expect, very self-deprecating about his own abilities, He said one time, I'm a fair guitarist, but I'm not anywhere near as good as my friend Eric Clapton. I said, well, George, there are not many people on this earth who can play what is, let's face it, a piece of wood with some strings stretched across it And especially when you put that slide on and play about 3 notes, and we know who it is.
That's right.
You
George
know.
Harrison's slide playing is so recognizable, so
Totally.
you can't even imitate it.
No,
It's amazing.
I don't know what, and I don't even know the trick. I think it's talent is what it is.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a great story about George and the legal problems he had with My Sweet Lord, because those opening words of that, my sweet Lord, was unfortunately, and not meaning to, but he had inadvertently hit on the same melody as a tune from the early 60s called He's So Fine by a group called the Chiffons.
Yep.
And so he had to go there. Those publishers sued him. And he went to, and while I was in England at Friar Park for a while, was one of those times when he had to go to court. And he came back one time and told me a story that was, first of all, the outcome of it was that the judge said, indeed, although I have no doubt that he did not intentionally go, he's so fine, my sweet Lord, yeah, I'll take it, I'll steal it. But inadvertently he did, and the law is the law about copyrights and you know, using other melodies. So they made some kind of settlement, which I don't know what it was. But the lawyer for George made what I thought was a fascinating argument. Unsuccessful, but fascinating nonetheless. He said, how many tunes could there be that have the exact same notes, but different rhythms, that you would never in a million years associate? The example he gave, Rock of Ages, da 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 da, right? Here's a Christmas carol that goes da 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 da.
Right.
And how many of those are there? Who the hell knows?
Okay, so not only did you work with George, but you worked with Ringo.
I did.
Did you meet Ringo through George?
I don't think I met Ringo then. I met him later when we did. I know I met him when we did the memorial concert for George, the concert for George in 2002, I think it was, at Albert Hall. No, he was not present at the session. It was Richard Perry production. I'd worked with Richard, who was, Richard had a great gift as a producer. He was he was a encyclopedia of popular music, which of course is helpful, and he was very good at picking songs and matching them to the appropriate artist. Really good at those things. When it came to him working with him in the studio, I remember hearing, I wasn't there, but I remember hearing a story where Jeff Porcaro was so frustrated by Richard insisting on doing further takes that I think he took the sticks and smashed them through the snare drum head and split.
Nice.
But anyway, Richard was the producer, and I had written this arrangement for a tune called Oh My My. I think it was 3 or 4 horns. I don't remember who was on the date. But of course he's one of those guys that wants to do 1 billion takes, and which is really annoying because you give your all in the first 2 or 3 takes, man.
Yeah. From
From that point on, it's just a recital. You've lost all the enthusiasm about it. You're just like whatever, But what was insulting about that session was because later on, when it came to getting paid, Richard tried to stiff us because we went over to overtime, and the scale, union scale for sessions was well defined by contract.
How much was it at that time, if you had to guess?
God, single scale probably was $85, $90 for 3 hours, something like that.
Okay, so if you were triple scale, it'd be 3 times that.
Yeah, but I don't think I was for that. I'm probably double though, because I was the leader for that session.
Yeah.
Because whoever's the designated leader for that session gets double scale. Again, I don't remember exactly, but and of course I got paid for the arrangement. So But I remember I was in like Switzerland or England somewhere doing the Carole King tour, which we did later based on an album she did called Fantasy. And I'm on the phone yelling at Richard Perry, going, "What the fuck, man? Listen. You should pay us based on the time we spent. Why are you trying to nickel and dime us on a Beatle record?" Listen to me. It's good. I have no bitterness.
Right. I was going to say, Tom, that's really amazing. You've really let go of things. I like it.
Oh my God.
Okay, so you also played with Steely Dan.
I did.
And I've interviewed so many people that have played with Steely Dan. That's kind of one of my pet projects is to kind of try and get through as many of the Steely Dan.
Who could blame you?
Right? So you are you're on Asia, right?
Yep.
What songs did you play?
Well, I played on all of them and arranged the horns for all of them except the tune Asia. Still sounds great, this thing.
Right?
It's like a dream come true. So won't you smile for the camera? I know they're gonna love it. Peg, I like your pin shot. I keep it with your letter. Done up in blueprint blue. It sure looks good.
Great little single note part on the guitar over there.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. This is Chuck Rainey, too. It's on bass, I believe. Yeah, fantastic.
What are you playing on that? Is that
Lyricon.
a Lyricon?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What is a Lyricon?
Funny you should. I thought you'd never ask. A Lyricon is a wind synthesizer, which there have been many incarnations over the years. One of them was called the Iwi. One is called the Yamaha WX7.
Yeah.
The one I'm currently playing is the latest incarnation of that, which is the Roland Aerophone.
Have they improved over time?
Well, they're I mean, in many ways. The original wind synthesizers, just like the early synthesizers, the pitch used to drift, so you'd have to constantly be adjusting that, which is annoying. They weren't as responsive, just things that over the years, obviously, the technical side of things has.
No, I mean, now
greatly.
they're
this one I'm playing now has 600 onboard sounds.
Yeah.
The original Lyricon had one.
Writing an arrangement for that, was the track done when you wrote the arrangement to it? Was the track
was
session?
done. Yeah.
So you get a cassette of it?
Well, let me back up a little bit, just how I even met them.
How did you meet them?
Well, Walter and I had a mutual dope dealer.
Okay.
Has the statute of limitations run out on that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I would say.
years ago.
Yeah.
So one day, he was there as I was, and he said, "Tom, you do horn arrangements, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, we're doing this record, and we need some horns on it." Great, I'd love to do it, So we agreed to meet at Village Recorders, down the way where you were yesterday.
Where I was yesterday, yeah.
That's when I met Walter and Gary Katz. Mm-hmm. And we discussed they'd want to have horn arrangements on, all of the tunes except Asia had some horns of some kind.
Yeah.
And the ones that had the biggest horn section, I think we decided on an instrumentation of 4 saxes, I think, maybe 5, and 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, something like that. And the one piece of guidance that I was given, it was we don't like high trumpets.
Okay.
Okay, fine. We'll do high trumpets. That's no problem. So I go home with it again, a reel-to-reel tape. We've explained that to write out the tunes, to write out the parts, the score. Well, I wrote the score. I had a copyist in those days. She was great, Peggy. So I would write the scores out of this thing. She would then copy out all the parts. We went back in to the studio on.
So wait, you're sitting there and you're like, I'll go, dun, 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 bum, bum,
particular lick might have come from them. I cannot remember.
Okay.
It's possible.
Yeah.
I'll give you a great example. The tune Deacon Blues.
Yep.
Okay. Deacon Blues, the very first note of the chord of the verse, it's an E minor chord with a G in the bass. 3 notes, G on the bottom, E and B. Boom. I've got all these fucking horns.
Yeah.
I'm not, if I just use those notes, it'd be stupid.
Yeah.
and not to mention unnecessary. So I took a chance, and thank God it was successful. I filled in a lot I adopted my buddy Oliver Nelson, my guru. I love the way he voiced stuff. So I would, instead of a G and then E and then B up here, I'd go E, F, A, B, and E on top. So now it's a big fat G 13th chord.
Yeah.
For those of you who understand that kind of stuff. Joni, forget it. You wouldn't know. I did that kind of stuff throughout the writing, and I thought, well, you know, I know that there are bodies of bass players, drummers, and guitarists strewn down Santa Monica Boulevard from all the great people who tried and failed to get on their record.
Just so people know what we're talking about.
Yeah. That chord.
The day of the expanding man. That shape is my shame. There where I used to stand. It seems like only yesterday I gazed through the glass at ramblers, wild gamblers. That's all in the past. Call me a fool.
Yes.
You say it's a crazy scheme. This one's for real. I already bought the dream.
Beautiful.
So useless to ask me why. Throw a kiss and say goodbye. I'll make it this time. I'm ready to cross that fine line. Learn to work the saxophone. I play just what I feel. Drink Scotch whiskey all night long.
It's not there yet.
And die behind the wheel. They got a name for the winners in the world.
Beautiful.
I want a name when I lose. Alabama, the Crimson Tide. Call me Deacon Blues.
When you're doing these arrangements, Tom, you're doing them on the piano?
And I learned a long time ago that from my father and from people like Michel Legrand, who I would be on dates and I'd just be studying like crazy, all this stuff going on, that the key to having a successful sounding arrangement, and that was basically a lot of just chords, just
Like more pads.
pads,
Yeah.
that they still have a melodic, that the lead is interesting,
Yeah.
and maybe not, don't follow the vocal. Do something that's in harmony, and that agrees with the vocal, that is not the melody. And so I took a while to figure out because those chords, they're not necessarily like that. Some of them are very angular, and so I have to figure out how the common tones that I can weave into a nice melodic thing. And I love doing that. That is a joy to do.
Okay, so tracking session, like this particular song.
Yeah.
Most of the overdubs are done, vocals are done typically, and then this is one of the last things that goes on.
That's
right?
correct, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
so you come in, you're the leader, right? You've done the arrangement. Where do you do it? How do you record it? Are you guys playing all together? Are you in a line?
No. Well, we were kind of semicircle,
Semicircle?
I believe, yeah. And this was at Village
Okay.
Recorders, the studio in the back there.
Semicircle, everybody's got music stands in front of them, right?
Yep.
And then how are you miking the stuff? How
Well,
were
I
they
did
miking
Mike
it?
Roger Nichols, who was listen, the stuff sounds amazing. He was such a bastard sometimes.
Yeah.
Oh my God. He just loved to like needle you. And I there are a couple of times I want to say, Roger, shut the fuck up.
So Tom, when you do this arrangement, how do you decide where everyone sits as far as
I
when
don't.
the parts?
That's the engineer's decision.
Okay, but you're the arranger on
Arranger,
it.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, do you have a master score for yourself in case?
No, I'm
there
in the
needs-
section. I mean, I have next to me probably,
Yeah.
but I figure if she's copied the notes that I wrote, it's going to be okay.
Okay. Now, did you ever get into a situation where where there might have been a wrong note in a part, and you're like, hey, this needs to be an E instead of an F or something?
Possible. I don't.
very rarely,
I don't
right?
remember that. Yes. Yeah. The one thing that I had to change, I had to redo. It had nothing to do with anything I wrote. But while in between the time that I had received that tape to write the arrangements and the session, they'd brought in my dear friend and an amazing tenor saxophonist, Pete Chrisley, who played the great solo on Deacon Blues.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But there was no solo there when I had the thing. So I wrote some stuff which became irrelevant. So I had to fix that. I don't remember whether I must have written some background, some pads or something for him. But other than that, everything went as recorded. We did all 6 tunes, I think, in 4 nights.
Okay.
I think by Steely Dan standards, that's
incredibly
victory.
fast, right? Would those guys be there when you're doing them?
Walter was not, unfortunately. Walter had addiction issues, he was such a sweet guy. It just was so tragic, man. But anyway, no, it was
With
all
Donald and Gary and everything.
Gary and Donald, yeah.
Okay. And would they have any comments on any of the parts?
I honestly don't remember that. I'm sure they must have, but I didn't change. I don't remember changing anything except that one thing.
How did recording sessions change from the late 60s when you started to let's go up to the 90s to digital recording, to the late 90s. Okay,
sure.
So tell me how things changed. Obviously, there were different track counts and stuff. You started out with maybe 16 track.
I started out with 8, actually.
8 track, and then
was
you
my
had
first
16
record,
tracks, and then 24.
Yeah, 8, 16, then 24.
Yeah, and then they would link
then,
machines.
And then, SMPTE. Oh my
Yeah.
God, that was annoying.
How did recording sessions differ from decade to decade?
Yeah.
Were they pretty much the same, or?
Well, I can tell you the biggest thing was the transition from analog to digital and the implications on things like editing. Quick story. I did an album in 1980 called Apple Juice. We recorded, it was 3 nights at the Bottom Line in New York, which is wonderful, no longer there anymore, but a club which every major jazz and folk and everybody else played there
Amazing
one time
place.
or another.
Yeah.
And I recorded a live album there with a fantastic band, Steve Gadd and Ralph McDonald, Eric Gale, Richard T., Hugh McCracken, and Marcus Miller. And I brought in, I had written this tune, I don't even remember how I got the idea, but I wrote a tune called So White and So Funky. Mm-hmm. How could I be so white and so funky? That was the question. And a friend of mine and I co-written the lyric. We got Dr. John. I don't remember how that came about, but thank God he agreed to do it. We recorded, I think, 3 or 4 nights, like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, like that at the Bottom Line, having started, the week and developed all the music. So Dr. John, I don't know how to put this diplomatically. He was not real great at learning new stuff rapidly.
Okay.
And being able to re-perform it like an hour later.
Okay.
So what happened was Wednesday, Thursday, he did okay, but not great. So on Friday, I sat with him and we went through the tune at the dressing room. I really wanted to make sure. So Friday, he sang it great. However, the band on Saturday was smoking.
Okay.
So this is, again, 24 tracks. We get back to California too. I had a studio in Santa Monica for a while. And so we got back there and we set upon one night the arduous task of syncing, one line at a time, Dr. John's Friday performance into the band's Saturday performance. And it took hours and hours. We were probably at 5 in the morning, one line at a time, start the tape. Okay, and start the tape, and oh shit, well we fucked it
Oh
up.
my God.
You know,
Things that are
but you'll
so-
you'll never know the difference when you hear it.
Things that are so easy to do now. You don't even think about it.
Nothing.
Right.
And by the way, as a horn player, you know, a lot of times we'd be the big ending for a lot of these pop tunes is, you know, the horns are blaring and going. You couldn't cut and paste anything. You had to play the whole damn thing, no matter, as long as the fade ended. And usually the thing is out by here, but the original thing we got up the track is like another minute and a half. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So that's the way it was. That's the way we had to do it. So that was the transition from analog to digital and the editing, the ease of editing with digital. Boy, that was a beautiful thing.
Do you think that it may have helped your playing though, by having to play
Sure.
on analog tape?
Yeah, in fact, I sort of wear it as a badge of honor, to be honest
Yeah.
with you, and as a lot of my fellow horn players do. No, we don't want to know. Don't cut and paste. We'll play it.
Right.
Very macho of us, huh?
I want to talk about some of your favorite horn players. I assume that you love Charlie Parker.
Yes, although I didn't discover him until later in my 20s. You know, as I told you earlier, my first saxophone hero was Jerry Mulligan.
Jerry Mulligan, okay.
And I will say that I got not only to meet him, he was very sweet to me and asked me to sit in with him in Montreux in 1970.
Wow.
And a year or two after that, he asked me to be on an album of his, which was just a joy. He was great. And as an arranger, everything, he doesn't get enough credit for his contributions to jazz, honestly. But anyway, then, of course, I got immediately later into the Miles Davis Sextet.
Yep.
Those two great albums that were done, Milestones and Kind of Blue. So Coltrane and Cannonball.
Yeah.
Cannonball to this day is still my favorite saxophone player because not only was he incredibly technically gifted and had all this prowess, but he also had this happy kind of thing going on. In fact, when I talk about those three players in the album they made, I say that on paper, you can't imagine three more different styles of soloing.
Yes.
Miles is like subtle and sophisticated and doesn't want to give you too much. He'll go, dee-doo, beep-boo-doo-doo, like that. Coltrane, at that point in his career, was doing what was described as sheets of sound.
Yeah.
He's on this search, and it's like unbelievable. You can't believe all the stuff he's playing, and it's all, and he rarely repeats himself, but it's just this amazing search. Cannonball is like, diddle-a-day-da, hey, nice day, and just happy. Three more contrasting solo styles you can't imagine, and yet it's magic.
Cannonball was an incredible melodic, the way he developed motifs.
That's why one of the other reasons why I love it so much. That's right.
Did you ever notice that on Milestones, how much this tune slows down? You never noticed this.
No, which tune?
On the tune Milestones.
Oh, really?
That's the end.
Wow, yeah, really relaxed.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
But they start.
Well, listen, this is an area of which I'm really familiar because I'm often called upon these days to do what I refer to as forensic arranging. A singer, a friend, or somebody somewhere wants me to recreate an arrangement that had been done for, say, Tony Bennett, in the 50s or 60s, or Frank Sinatra or whoever. The first thing I have to do in order to make it easy for myself as possible is do a tempo map.
Yeah.
Where I put the thing in my Logic computer, and then, based on, depending how steady the tempo is, I'll find the starting tempo, and then like by bar 10, it's starting to drift. So now we got a new tempo. So I've got a list of tempos this long, but it means I can go to bar 31 and hit the thing, and it's bar 31. If I just stick with the same tempo, it's going to be all over the place.
Okay, so you go and you do a takedown of the arrangements.
A takedown, or more commonly, I will decide what of that arrangement is still without, that's not corny, or something that needs
Sure.
updating, let's put it
Yeah,
that
yeah.
way. Maybe revoicing, reharmonizing, or maybe the rhythms sound kind of old dated to me, so I'll change them. And yeah, so that's what I do, a lot of that.
This is really interesting because you're one of the few people that I've interviewed that spans all these different eras, yet you seem to be so comfortable with kind of what's going on today and using current technology, right? Using things like Logic and tempo mapping. Could you ever have imagined this stuff? I mean, seriously.
No. Of course, how could you? Who knew all about all this? I remember in the 70s, the early 70s, envisioning that I would have, I really wanted to be like an airline pilot, sort of where I had a console and a writing desk, all within, 180 degrees reach, maybe overhead, I don't know. But, that I was piloting this thing, this music creating place. But again, never the fact
And it's
that
so
I could,
easy to do. Now you just have a laptop or whatever. and you
yeah,
just-
I've been on a MacBook Pro for years.
Would it have changed what you did or your trajectory as a musician if this technology was around?
That's a fascinating question. I have no idea. I like to think. Here's the thing. I'm so grateful that I grew up in a time where it was all analog and I had to write. For example, when I started doing dramatic scores for television, what I used to call Law and Order Funk, which was kind of my specialty, for shows like Cannon and Barnaby Jones, Streets of San Francisco.
Yeah.
Beretta, I did all the background music for that for 2.5 years.
You wrote the Streets of San Francisco theme song,
No,
too, didn't you?
no.
Okay.
Pat Williams wrote it. I played all the sax fills.
Okay.
But the one I wrote was Starsky and Hutch.
Starsky and Hutch,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Now, I'm at the age where I know every one of these,
Yeah,
every one
you
of
are.
these shows.
For better or worse.
But in the process of doing all these things,
Yeah, you learn, as my father told me years ago, because he I used to hear him playing the piano, but he said, "Look, I'm not hunting with my fingers to try and find a melody. The ideas come from here, and I write them down, and then maybe check the piano, check the harmony,
Yeah.
But he says, don't become a slave to your own technical limitations."
Right.
Great advice.
Yeah.
And so I learned not to rely on, as so many kids today, I press a button and stuff happens.
Yeah.
What fun is that?
Right.
I couldn't imagine doing that. I wouldn't want it, just no fun. It's a challenge. It's if you really love making music, creating music, then fucking do it yourself.
Yeah.
At the risk of stating the obvious, I don't know. But all that knowledge, in other words, when I did those dramatic shows, I had a piece of score paper this big, 4 woodwinds, then trumpets, French horns, trombones, rhythm, and strings at the bottom. And I wrote every goddamn note on it with a pencil. Mm-hmm. There's no better way to really learn to understand the mechanics of music, orchestration, melody, harmony, all that stuff. And how to write for a drum part. I still hate writing drum parts because I got to do it with two different, I got to write the upper part and then the lower part, and it's a pain in the ass.
But nowadays, you don't really need a copyist anymore. or
No,
anything like
that's
that.
true, and the parts last forever because they're on a drive.
Right.
Which, this is funny. When we were on the tour with Joni, and the thing that I hated ever having to do again were the piano parts because they were written out. A lot of stuff was very specific,
Yeah.
and I'd had it written out on 2 staves. Some overzealous fan somewhere during that tour we did in '74.
Come up and steal the parts,
yes. I had to write them over on the bus.
Oh my God.
Fucking,
Jeez.
yeah. So that's the thing. You want the part here? Take it.
Right. Tom, this has been incredibly fun talking to you, and it was great meeting you back in 2021, and I was honored that you asked me to be on your podcast.
Oh, come on. You're a bit of an icon yourself.
Oh, come on. But to actually meet you in person is really cool. And I was shocked though when I saw you on, on Zoom because
You expected an old man with a beard?
yeah, you seem so young, and you are. I mean, you are young, but you just have your presence is of a very young person.
I
It's really
refuse to
interesting.
acknowledge my age.
That's very cool. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate
Rick,
it.
it's my pleasure. Thank
You're
you, my
awesome.
friend.
Yes,
Thank you.
thanks.
It's fun.